Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Wine Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and the latest top headlines are that Israel and Lebanon have decided on a 10-day ceasefire that starts at 2100 GMT today. This is big news after we've seen this war play out since early March. This has been part of the war, the escalations between Israel, the United States, and Iran, and then Lebanon got into that war as well. We're going to give you the latest details of what has happened. We're going to talk about what's going on Parliament Hill in Canadian politics and business news. So that is all we have for you today in Wine Media Newsroom. So let's start with the breaking news, which is that Lebanon and Israel have now agreed to this 10-day ceasefire, which will start today at 2100 GMT time zone. This is important because we know that Iran and US are due potentially to have talks, second round of talks, any day now. It's not confirmed in terms of the date or any of that, but we do hear from the president as well as what we're hearing out of the active movements from the Pakistani side in Iran that there will be talks. So having this ceasefire is great between Israel and Lebanon, and also great for the casualties. But to that response, you have Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, saying that as long as this ceasefire continues, that they are asking that the occupation that we're seeing, Israel saying essentially they intend on having the occupation of southern Lebanon to the Litani River. Hezbollah saying that during the ceasefire, there should not be any freedom of movement by the Israeli soldiers that are in southern Lebanon. So, of course, this is a developing story. We're going to see what happens once when the start of the ceasefire begins. Of course, the world reaction welcomes this ceasefire. We know that the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israeli forces was part of the 10 points that Iran had put forward to President Trump on April 7th when they agreed on the ceasefire. And then the next day, we saw that the Israeli forces still continued, which was one of the worst airstrikes, about 100 airstrikes in 10 minutes on Lebanon. The following day, which was April 8th, after the ceasefire talks, essentially White House saying that Lebanon was not part of the deal, Iran saying yes, Lebanon was part of the deal. So now this is great development that we're hearing from the European Union and all the other countries saying that they're very happy that this 10-day ceasefire will take place. So what's happening right now in Iran? Right now, Pakistan's army chief Asim Munir is in Tehran. He arrived yesterday, still having the conversations with, what would mean to go back to the talks with the United States for a second round. We saw this war take place. Today is day 48 since this war started, and we are in a 2-week ceasefire period where we haven't seen the Americans, Israelis, or the Iranians attack each other, essentially. So, but there's still probably another week left of this 2-week ceasefire. We're going to know fairly soon if the ceasefire will, the time limit will increase or not. That's to be seen. But hopefully within the next few days, we're going to hear more about the second round of talks. Now, many people are wondering, why is Pakistan in the middle of this, and how are they able to mediate and try to get both sides to talk again? Well, you got to take a look at it, is that Pakistan has close ties to President Trump when it comes to the US, and it's got its relationship sharing a border with Iran. So therefore, in terms of regional proximity and religion, it's all aligned. But when it comes to that as well, it's got its strong links with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, China, and of course, Russia. So all those key factors makes it, in a very unique situation to be able to be, in a way, the trusted source when you have a trust deficit between Iran and the United States and Israel. Well, having Pakistan there as a trusted source that they're all listening to is, as I said earlier, this is a masterclass in diplomacy that we're seeing play out. Now, we know the first round of talks that took place in Islamabad over the last weekend, the talks lasted 21 hours, and essentially they couldn't agree on certain things. Now, what did they not agree on? We know the talks are not closed, but what they could not agree on in that 21 hours is that essentially the United States JD Vance, the vice president, led those talks. And then there was hard lines that was proposed to Iran that was not part of the 10-point plan that it had initially agreed on the ceasefire on. But the United States said that they want a long-term halt to Iran's nuclear program, essentially saying we want a halt for 20 years. Iran rebutted saying, okay, they can offer 3 to 5 years only, but they do still want the right to enrich for civilian purposes. Now, Iran is also demanding sanctions relief. They're demanding monetary compensation, and they're demanding that with the sanctions relief, that they will have access to their frozen funds. Of course, Iran's in a situation that has been hit tremendously when it comes to its infrastructure and has to go into a rebuilding plan. Estimated cost of trillions of dollars. So there's that aspect. And the Strait of Hormuz is another critical point. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical point for world energy corridor, which we saw Iran essentially create a chokehold of during this war that took place. And since a few days ago, you had the U.S. military naval ships now blocking the Iranian port. There has been, some confirmation that some of the vessels were able to leave the Iranian port. Essentially, this is the port where Iran exports its oil to, Japan, to South Korea, to China, and key consumers of the Iranian oil. So now the United States is saying that the Strait of Hormuz is open for vessels to go through. It's just right now blockading the Iranian ports. Prior to that, Iran said that it is reopened to all civilian vessels and not military. So there's that conflict of pressure on both sides that we hope to see that will bring both sides to the table to negotiate again. So now the ceasefire will expire on April 22nd between Iran and the United States and Israel. And so far, 4,000 people have lost their lives, which is very tragic because of this war that's taken place. And we know when it comes to the global economy, it's been impacted severely. Now, the United States said that it will continue its naval blockade and it will try to threaten Iran's trade routes and essentially shut it down as military posturing to remain active until both sides can come to the table. We know that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, has been actively today talking about how it's ready to go back into combat with Iran, back into war any moment. So there's been conflicting, messaging coming out of the White House with President Trump saying that any day now there could be an agreement, an end of the war. And then the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, essentially sending out new and fresh levels of threat. So which is creating this level of mistrust. You could say that Pakistan seems to be, in the middle of in terms of negotiating and calming both sides. Now, this is at a time where we're all looking for not just a ceasefire, but an end to the war. So, of course, we're going to bring you the latest in terms of what happens when they meet and what are some of the points. Now, when it comes to the global implication of this war, we have seen that oil has been volatile in terms of its pricing. We know that the shipping routes have been disrupted. There's numbers of about 2,000 ships that were left stranded because of the blockades. We know insuring those naval ships have been through the roof. And we know that some countries have paid the toll previously to Iran, about 2 million just to be able to pass the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, it's affected the production and the output of the GCC countries when it comes to oil, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the rest of them. And oil is their main revenue generator. So these are massive things. Now, because of the blockades of Iranian ports, Iran has threatened a wider response. First, essentially saying that it's going to attack the GCC ports, but now saying that it's because of the U.S. blockade, it's going to block the other waterways, such as the Red Sea, which will increase, obviously, the disruption that that's taking place. Now, just to give you numbers to clarify what this could all mean. Well, the Strait of Hormuz, also in the Gulf region, right, which is the waterway that Iran has created a chokehold on, and then you have underneath that you have the Bab el-Mandeb. It's the Red Sea entryway, which is another way that Saudi Arabia can export its oil, and Iran is threatening to close that off. And that route actually goes into also Europe and Asian trade routes, right? So overall, you have 20% of global oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which is about 20 to 21 million barrels a day that move through the strait. You have 25% of global seaborne oil trade that is at risk because of this. You have 20% of global LNG also that passes through there. So the disruptions of both mean oil and natural gas markets. The Red Sea route, it handles 10 to 15% of global trade, and that's also on the other side via the Suez Canal, which is critical for Europe's consumption of oil, which is what we're seeing the energy prices rise in Germany and in United Kingdom. And so it's created a massive situation of an affordability in the European region. And when it comes to the shipping traffic at the Strait of Hormuz, it dropped sharply because of this war that started between the three nations, and it stalled the traffic. A decline in 70% of tankers and 150 ships, all the way up to 2,000 ships, were said to be forced to either reroute or be stranded. We know that the oil prices skyrocketed above $100 per barrel. So this is things that we need to watch as things continue. Now, when it comes to Israel and what it has been doing in Lebanon, the latest numbers have been there's been 200 strikes in about 24 hours as the offensive is intensifying between Hezbollah and IDF, Israeli soldiers. And this is now the latest news is that Israel has intensified its strikes south of the Litani River. Essentially, the Israeli forces are targeting areas south. And that's been part of, we've heard so far from Israeli Prime Minister of the greater Israel should go to the Litani River. This is a strategic boundary in southern Lebanon. And today we've heard that a bridge has been, attacked that connects the two areas together. So, so far it's 5 bridges over the Litani River have been destroyed. And these are key transportation links that is isolating southern Lebanon. And this is what, because the ceasefire, this is Hezbollah is essentially saying that the IDF soldiers should be retreating, not taking over southern Lebanon, since the bridge to it through the Litani River has been destroyed. Now we are talking about civilian casualties so far. There's 2,100 people who've been killed in Lebanon. 1.2 million people have been displaced, essentially having to leave that region of southern Lebanon and not being able to return again to their homes. And these numbers are growing. It is a humanitarian issue. UN has actually asked for the ceasefire. A lot of countries have also spoken widely about it. So, it is good news that we're going to see the ceasefire, but what's to come of it? Of course, this is a growing story. This is at the same time where you're having politicians, and especially when it comes to Italy, it has now abandoned its agreement with Israel when it comes to defense. It's saying that it's not going to renew it. Essentially, the Prime Minister of Italy has had backlash that she did not stand up and do anything when the entire Gaza situation was taking place. Some of those numbers that she's, had in her parliament of the opposition really raised against her have been, when it comes to death toll in Gaza and the West Bank, we're talking about 72,345 people have been killed. That is a total of also 172,250 have been wounded. Massive numbers in Gaza when it comes to the West Bank. That's 1,150 people have been killed and 11,885 have been wounded. So those numbers are staggering. And that doesn't include of what's been happening in southern Lebanon of the 2,100 people who've been killed. So this talks between Israel and Lebanon is after 35 years, and President Trump has been a key factor in being able to have the two sides talk and reach some sort of a diplomacy, and hopefully this is what will come out of it in terms of diplomacy talks. And what we'll see in terms of what will be the demands for the end of that war. Will it be that Israel will get to keep the southern border of Lebanon, region of Lebanon, which is about 10% of Lebanon's land, to be able to end this war? Or is this something that the ceasefire and the negotiations that will carry on, which could potentially mean that Lebanon goes Israeli forces go back to Israel, and Lebanon is able to take over southern Lebanon again. So this is, I think, up for contention, which will probably be negotiated in this 10-day ceasefire. We're going to bring you the latest as we can. And the latest in terms of how this is affecting Europe, well, Europe is saying that it only has 6 weeks of jet fuel left. This means oil disruptions. This could mean jet fuel is highly specialized. So that means there'll be flight cancellations. The flights that are being booked, the prices of tickets will be through the roof. This will create supply chain delays and, of course, price spikes globally. Europe is a popular destination to visit throughout the summer months. And just to hear that Europe has 6 weeks of jet fuel left, that is big. In Europe, we're talking about an entire continent. We're not talking in an entire region. We're not talking about just one or two countries. So this is very alarming, to say the least, of what Europe has been putting forward. And when it comes to having an adult in the room that can essentially say something to calm the nerves of the global people, 8 billion people on this world, and watching this war play out in the global economy overall. Well, it's been Pope Leo. He stepped in and he's essentially saying the world is ruled by tyrants after what President Trump has been putting on his social media in attacks of Pope Leo. Pope Leo has blasted world leaders and saying that these are the leaders who spend billions of dollars on war, and said that the world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants. These are stark, serious remarks by a pope, and many cannot deny the pope is calling it as he sees it. I don't think the world population is happy about this arms race that we're seeing, about the lives that are being lost, the civilian population that are affected throughout these entire wars that take place. So Pope Leo said it as he sees it. He said that billions of dollars are being spent on war, and he said that the world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants, and his unusually forceful remarks are absolutely unheard of, but very welcome. He made these remarks in Cameroon through his tour. He essentially, a quote from Pope Leo saying that the masters of war pretend not to know what it takes, only a moment to destroy, yet often a lifetime is not enough to rebuild. And he's very right. If you can imagine the civilizations that are being destroyed, landmarks, when it comes to history, everything that's being destroyed. These politicians are in office maybe 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, but what is destroyed with billions of taxpayer dollars, this is not coming from the politicians' own bank accounts. These are taxpayer dollars that those tax dollars should have been going into investing back into their own economy when it comes to jobs, infrastructure, education, healthcare, and everything else. It's going into these, what feels like forever wars of destruction. And the Pope said, and this is a quote from him, they said that they turn a blind eye to the fact that billions of dollars are spent on killing and devastation, yet the resources needed for healing, education, and restoration are nowhere to be found. And is he not right when you hear the government saying, sorry, it's not in our budget to extend, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to taking care of the elderly, when it comes to taking care of the veterans, when it comes to making sure that education is affordable for the youth, when it comes to all sorts of social programs, or when it comes to infrastructure spending, when it comes to making sure that the civilian population, like the police and teachers and everyone else, is paid a decent wage because of how they contribute to the local economy and our country. And when we hear that, sorry, we don't have enough, but yet we see billions and billions and billions of dollars go out to these wars or to countries who are in wars, and essentially funding them is what Pope Leo is talking about. So I'm going to repeat his sentence again. He says they turn, and he's talking about the tyrants that the world has. He says they turn a blind eye to the fact that billions of dollars are spent on killing and devastation, yet the resources needed for healing, education, and restoration are nowhere to be found. That is by Pope Leo. And today you have the G20 finance ministers meeting in Washington, D.C., essentially top of the agenda. is the global economy. The G20 finance leaders flagged ongoing risks such as geopolitical conflicts, some of which we've just been talking about, trade tensions that started with tariffs, as well as now war, and high debt levels and supply chain disruptions, essentially not allowing the private sector to be, flourishing as it would because of these supply chain disruptions. Essentially, now the focus on the financial stability and data is that there needs to be better and more standardized data to be able to assess what it means when these G20 finance leaders are meeting today, and essentially having a closer monitoring on financial risks to be able to make better decisions. And of course, when it affects their local governments. They have also talked about part of the agenda for today's discussion is scaling back on climate and development financing, because it seems like, the climate initiatives that were once in place, maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, have shifted dramatically since President Trump came back into office for his second term, and really setting the agenda on the climate policy overall. And what we've seen play out, of course, with this, oil being over $100 per barrel, which is affecting every other industry. And you could even say the prices in the grocery store. Essentially, these leaders are meeting today to talk about the debt crisis, higher borrowing costs, and slow growth, and what's to be done. And if you're just wondering what that means, these G20 economies, well, they're the majority of the global GDP and trade. And for Canada, it's about 90% of its trade is tied to G20 countries. So top of agenda is inflation, interest rates, and trade flow. The 20 G20 countries are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Republic of Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States, European Union, and the African Union are also in attendance. Now let's come back to Canadian politics. Well, lots been happening since the first week of the Carney majority government. And since then, Prime Minister Mark Carney has introduced some measures to make life a little bit more affordable when it comes to the gas tax. He announced 10 cents off the liter for gas and 4 cents for diesel. And this is to start on Monday, April 20th, and go all the way till Labor Day. But we had the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, really dig in on more affordability and permanent affordability. Take a look at what the debate is in Parliament.
Does he even read his own budget? There are 3 Liberal taxes on gasoline. Number 1, there's the excise tax. Then there's the new Liberal carbon tax they call the fuel standard. And then they charge the GST on those other 2 taxes. Now, with Canada having the highest grocery price inflation in the G7 and paying 20% more at the pumps, we put the pressure on the Prime Minister, and he's partially backed down, removing only one of those taxes and only for a third of the year. Why doesn't he follow our full plan to reduce gas prices by 25 cents a litre by getting rid of all the taxes for all the year?
Mr. Speaker, what the government is proposing is to cut the excise tax, 10 cents a litre for gasoline, 4 cents on diesel. We've already cut the consumer carbon tax, 18 cents per litre. We are recycling all the excess revenues from higher oil prices to Canadians. What we are not doing is what the Leader of the Opposition is proposing, which is to substantially increase the deficit, something he's regularly against, by more than $3 billion, because this government can count, Mr. Speaker. This government can count.
What he is not doing is increasing the deficit. It's only up by 100% since he took office, Mr. Speaker. Does he even read his own budget, or does he want Canadians not to know what's inside it? In fact, all the money printing that he does, because he's famous for causing inflation, he's made a career out of it.
Mr. Speaker, one thing I've learned in my economics education is you've got to study history and you've got to look at numbers. My record as a central bank governor is inflation less than 2% at the Bank of Canada, inflation less than 2% at the Bank of England.
It's clear that he's learned all the wrong lessons. Not only did he cause the housing crisis in London, Not only did he cause the worst inflation in the G7 when he was the bank governor over there, he advised Justin Trudeau to print money here, causing inflation. And since arriving in Canada, he's given us the worst food price inflation in the G7, the worst investment in the G7, the worst housing costs in the G7, the worst household debt in the G7.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Mr. Speaker, I feel like I'm in the presence of students. And on an exam, I don't think you would pass the exam with those answers.
Mr. Speaker, what we have over there is inflation of liberal arrogance. Yes. Right now, he wants to tell Canadians that they've never had it so good.
Mr. Speaker, to learn a lesson, you have to have ears to hear. There are some on the benches opposite who've been listening, Mr. Speaker.
There you have it. If you're wondering what our politicians are doing on Parliament Hill when it comes to the affordability crisis, that is their debate. Now, the Conservatives are also saying that they fully back Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the official opposition to that government, the Liberal government, as you saw that play out today. They're saying that essentially Pierre Poilievre is going to stay on as leader and lead to the next federal election. There's been lots of speculation that maybe there might be a change in leadership with the Conservative Party since Pierre Poilievre, had 4 of his MPs cross the floor and many more that we're hearing rumors about that may cross the floor still. So that's to be, that'll happen if it does. And of course, we're going to cover the latest on it. But so far, there's been solidarity when it comes to the Conservative Party behind their leader, Pierre Poilievre. And interestingly enough, when it comes to the NDP, we know they don't have party status. Essentially, they had one of their MPs cross the floor, their MP, and none of it cross the floor and become a Liberal MP. Now the NDPs are down to just 6 seats, and therefore they're no longer party status. You need to have 12 MPs to have party status. What does party status mean? Essentially means you have funding. You're going to be able to sit in committees that help make legislation, and you're going to also have funding to be able to do research and funding for your MPs to really be able to have a momentum in your party. This is the legacy that was left behind by the last leader, Jagmeet Singh. Every election, the NDPs went down many more seats, even though Jagmeet Singh was a very popular leader in terms of, many people following him on social media and very likable by all measures when it came to the polls. But when it came to election time, because of many different things going on, whether it was affordability, whether it was many different crises that Canadians were experiencing, the NDP vote went Liberal many times, and we saw that happen under Trudeau, and we saw that happen, of course, under this Mark Carney government. So now the NDP are getting a special boost of $670,000 despite losing their status. So this is money that they would not have because they do not have party status, but Parliament has bent the rules for them to give them some cash because they're cash strapped and they need to be able to rebuild their party. So the NDP is getting $670,000 in funding boost, and this is part of their parliamentary funding, despite their lack of status that they wouldn't have. This came as the funding was approved by the Board of Internal Economy, with MPs from other parties agreeing to the boost to this new party and with the new leader that has taken helm of the NDP. Now, these were adjusted behind the scenes to make the support possible for the NDP. When it comes to the news, business news, well, you cannot talk about business news now without having to mention AI, and that is now also affecting the sports industry. So AI has now entered the front office decisions when it comes to sports. At the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the CEO reportedly pushed an AI-generated trade ideas to the Toronto Maple Leafs office, essentially saying that, there was a deadline for what the trade deadlines would be for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And some of the suggestions on terms of players came what, would have been what AI would suspect on trading their players and how to build a more productive and profitable team. So essentially, is this now going to be part of the decision making, which was usually down to when it came to coaches and general managers but that's to be seen. So now we're seeing that there's cost cutting extended to players, essentially higher costs for players when it comes to family tickets. We're seeing that charges for food at real sports and bar grills kind of going up, and that's signaling a tightening on profit and less on the culture of sports. So this is what we're seeing latest when it comes to the sports development. When it comes to Rogers, Rogers is consolidating its sports power. Currently, Rogers Communication already owns 75% of the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and they are likely to acquire the other 25%, giving full control over Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto Raptors, Toronto Blue Jays, Toronto FC, Toronto Argonauts, and Sportsnet. So this is a massive move on Rogers, essentially becoming the monopoly when it comes to all Toronto sports on those franchises. Now, there are talks that there could be an IPO that could change the game. Rogers is reportedly considering spinning these assets into public companies. And what that would mean is essentially investor pressure. It would be, if they do turn into IPO, then it would be, focus on quarterly profits and more corporate decision making. So this is a massive shift to the hedge fund models that we've seen in sports traditionally. Essentially, teams were increasingly treated like financial assets under these new types of models, where players are tradable assets when they trade players and buy and sell them. And of course, winning is part of the game in terms of how profitable a team is and what the margins would be when that team plays, and all the actual, stuff that, promotions that come with that team. So now when it comes to pro sports, it's shifting away from from a performance driven to a profit driven model, perhaps also having AI and executives and investors increasingly being part of these decision makers. That was, before traditionally up to coaches, like all those great movies we watch where a coach really believes in the team and the general manager is able to then, get the right team players and put them in. So a bit of a shift there. When it comes to concerts, well, we know that Live Nations has been the key place to go for concert tickets, and really having access to that entire venue of concerts and distribution model. Well, now Live Nation, it's been ruled that it has an illegal monopoly for controlling concert promotions, ticketing via Ticketmaster, and venue access. And the courts have found that it used its dominance to limit competition and raise prices. So this is a key thing. So now when the average overcharge was about $1.72 per ticket, now you're seeing that change with total fees on tickets often 20 to 40% of face value in real world purchases. So now Live Nation controls about 70 to 80% of major concert venues through North America. So why does this matter? Well, this forced breakup will create, by having a Ticketmaster spinoff, it will create lower fees, more competition because of the open market, and that could possibly change artist touring and what that means for the economics of things. Essentially, in capitalism, it's believed that, free and fair and open markets creates more competition. When there's more competition, that means the consumer has more opportunities in terms of buying prices, and has, because of the increased competition, is able to find things at a better price and potentially better services, because that is what competition drives between competitors. And Uber, that's been, that really disrupted the taxi industry, if you recall, about 10 years ago when Uber was allowed to come into Toronto and, be nationwide as well as different countries. Well, Uber is now trying to do something a little bit more disruptive again, because it's looking at the trajectory of where transportation industry is going when it comes to AI. So now Uber is investing $10 billion into autonomous tech vehicles and vehicle fleets. This is they're planning what would be a robo-taxi that would be launched in 15 cities. This is a massive shift from their existing business model. What is their existing business model? Essentially, people who have vehicles who want to be able to pick up some, hours to make some money as a side gig, or maybe as the main gig, could, log in and become an Uber driver, essentially, providing their credentials. Once they get their clearance, they become an Uber driver, and they can start driving their own vehicles with their own insurance for Uber. Uber provides them the platform, which is the app that consumers use to be able to find drivers, and drivers being able to find customers to be able to get a percentage of that rideshare value. Now, the difference is that when Uber is going to go into the robo-taxi business, and autonomous vehicles mean essentially driverless cars, right, that are being driven, and then having to buy a fleet of those autonomous vehicles is a massive change of where Uber's business model is. Essentially, this new model it could mean tens of thousands of vehicles that Uber will purchase. And here are the risks. This is a really risky business, but here are the risks. The risks are the higher upfront costs. Imagine Uber now has to shell out the capital to purchase tens of thousands of vehicles, whereas in the old business model, and that's current business model, not old yet, current business model, they don't have to buy those vehicles. Those vehicles belong to the drivers. So this is a shift. And from that, essentially, they're saying that their long-term goals are to eliminate the driver costs, right? So you have autonomous cars, which means essentially driverless cars, means that you're not going to have to pay the fees to drivers anymore. And think about it. Do you recall when the ATM machines came out, and therefore you no longer had to go to the teller at the bank to go do your basic banking? You could just go to the ATM machine. And so therefore, the banking industry, when it came to their retail banking, they were able to, save a little bit of that overhead and be able to repurpose it for other departments. Now, this is what this Uber company is doing, essentially saying, hey, we're going to have autonomous cars. It's going to be driverless vehicles. And essentially, because of that, we're not going to have to pay drivers the percentage that they take on providing their vehicles for this rideshare service. Now, so Uber wants to get into the business of competing with Waymo. If you've ever been to Waymo, it's essentially you get it's a partial of the price of paying Uber or Lyft, and it is a driverless car. You sit in the back, and Waymo takes you, and the Waymo is all over Los Angeles and many other cities, and now it's like become somewhat of a mainstream thing because not only is it more competitive than getting into Uber or a Lyft, but now you don't have to deal with a driver. And and some people say, hey, when it comes to the safety issues, that they feel a little bit more comfortable that they don't have to deal with a human, but yet they're in an autonomous car. And of course, Tesla's plan of being able to push out their autonomous robo taxis, massive things, and Uber wants to get ahead of this and be part of the future of where AI is going. And when it comes to LIV Golf, well, this was something that was put together by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. It was $5 billion in investment. If you recall, they were poaching key top golf players at a time. Now it's run into quite a problem. They're saying that it's not a sustainable revenue model because of the heavy spending with the 9-figure contracts to lure top players into LIV Golf, which is backed in Saudi Arabia. And now it's seeing that the lower viewership compared to PGA tours, essentially saying that maybe it's not going to be profitable. So there's going to be funding cuts that are going to be put in place, and essentially potentially a shutdown or a restructuring that could take place. And the lesson learned here is that money alone can't disrupt legacy sports because fan engagements and media still win at the end of the day. When it comes to Toronto FIFA, well, the Fan Fest, the costs are going through the roof. What was before originally free is now going to be a $300 per ticket item. So now what has changed? Well, essentially security costs have skyrocketed because there's larger crowds and it is global events, which equals high risk targets. So now because police are required, private security are required, crowd control infrastructure, screening checkpoints are all part of it. Essentially, security is now one of the biggest items that are driving up the costs. And to that, when you think about it, the Fan Fest isn't just like a screen anymore. It is now a full production. What is part of that full production? It is giant HD screens, live broadcasts and licensing deals that take place, sound systems, staging, staffing, logistics, and permits. And all of that essentially to create a mini stadium experience without the tickets was the original idea. That is why the price is increasing. Essentially, hosting a FIFA World Cup is now massively expensive with infrastructure upgrades, transit policing, staffing, city budgets under pressure, So what does that mean? It means charging fans, which equals cost recovery strategy by FIFA. And when you go into what is happening next at Snap, well, lots of people have known if you like Snap, if you have the Snap app, which is essentially, which was very innovative when it first came out, which is to be able to have, in a group, a chat with people that, you add on, and they're able to send you videos or messages or pictures that would delete after a certain period of time. And if that person that you sent it to was able to take a screenshot, then there would be a status that a screenshot was taken. And that became very popular for people who just didn't want to have, a track record of all their conversations. Maybe it's a private conversation. They just did not want it to be in their DMs. And essentially, if you have other apps, if somebody sends you a picture or a video, then it goes and saves in your photos. This is a way that it would just delete and would keep things cleaner. Well, Snap has changed their business model. And by that, a lot of changes are happening. It has now announced a layoff of 1,000 employees that represent 16% of its workforce. The CEO essentially attributed this to reduction of staffing of 1,000 people, 16% of its workforce, to AI efficiency and shareholder pressure. So what's happening? Well, Snap has essentially swapped its traditional teams for smaller AI pods. And what that is that the tech is now being written, 65% of its new codes are being written by AI, and fielding of a million plus messages, monthly queries with the company are actually being handled by AI. So, with the queries as well as new coding, 65% of it is now going under AI. Therefore, it saw that 1,000 of its employees are being laid off, essentially saying, the CEO saying that this has enabled our teams to reduce repetitive work, increase velocity, and better support our community partners and advertisers. So again, it's the bottom line profit, productivity in terms of what AI can contribute, and profit, increasing because now you don't have to pay the salaries, and the efficiency of AI writing code. So it's a very disruptive time that we all need to take a hold of about what's happening in this AI race and super intelligence, in a very fast way. If you recall, Block was the first company that did its layoffs. Prior to that, just on Snap, the social media giant stock rose 7 to 9%. So layoffs usually would have affected its stock, but because the layoffs are due to efficiency of AI, the stock rose 7 to 9%. And essentially, but the news does remain that it was down 30% year to date. And the plan is targeting essentially $500 million in annual cost savings by the end of 2026. So, what does that mean? Laying off 1,000 employees, does that contribute to the $500 million annual cost savings? It definitely does, and other things. So now, if you recall back with this whole AI disruption, the first company that really moved on this was Block. It was back when it decided to do this entire AI layoff that took place in February. It cut 4,000 jobs. It was 40% of its staff, and it was 70,000 of its tech jobs were being erased across the company. This year, Block is the American financial technology company that was founded in 2009 by Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey was also the creator of Twitter, that's now X, under Elon Musk. And essentially, Block is the payment provider for, Square. So if you ever deal with, using your credit card at certain locations, retail locations, Square is by Block, as well as the Cash App, Afterpay, Tittle, a lot of Bitcoin-focused initiatives. They cut 40% of their staffing by laying off 4,000 jobs, and that was just in February. So now we know that when it comes to Snap, they've seen slower in revenue. They've had competition with TikTok and Meta. So this is another way of responding to the market. Now, when it comes to chocolate, do you like chocolate? And a lot of people would probably say they do like chocolate, whether it's milk chocolate, whether it's dark chocolate. I prefer dark chocolate, whether it's white chocolate. But now seems to be some sort of innovation when it comes to lab grown ingredients for chocolate. Yes, you heard it right. Lab grown cocoa is a breakthrough that is Mandela's International, which is the owner of Cadbury. It has now produced a milk chocolate using lab-grown cocoa butter from Celeste Bio. Well, how does this work? Well, the cocoa cells are extracted from the real beans, then grown in a tank with sugar and nutrients that result in a bioidentical cocoa butter, essentially saying that it's going to have the same culture as natural cocoa butter. Why is this the case? There seems to be a cocoa shortage driving the innovation. Global cocoa markets have been under pressure. Prices have surged 200% in recent years. This is because of climate change, crop disease, and West Africa production declines. So that's part of it. And, this reminds me of this war that's been taking place, now day 48 of the war between US, Israel, and Iran. And we know fertilizer is one of the key components that's being affected for its exports to South Asian countries and Africa, which could mean famine, which also means disruptions in crops. So that's something to be mindful of. But going back to the shortage in cocoa, which is driving this lab innovation, essentially industries are responding by saying that they're going to now, this innovation is to reduce the cocoa, shortage that they're having, but other similar companies that provide chocolate as part of their goods, they're saying that they're reducing the cocoa content, so that might change the taste of chocolate, or replace cocoa butter with cheaper fats. So essentially, do you want to eat genetically modified foods? That's, I think, the critical point of all of this, given that there have been studies that says that chocolate is good for you. Obviously, dark chocolate with higher cocoa content is good for you. And now we're seeing this innovation where it affects the bottom line of companies like Cadbury to be able to have the output of these sugary sweets, but it's genetically modified. Now, when it talks about just some of the stats, there's about 50,000 tons by 2035 that Celeste is aiming to produce. So essentially, the company that has partnered to make this genetically modified, lab-grown cocoa, Celeste is aiming to produce about 50,000 tons annually, which is about 5% of global cocoa butter demand. So it's not a full replacement, they're saying, but it is in a way to, help with the supply chain and as a buffer. So what is the bottom line? Chocolate may be entering a lab-grown era. It's driven by not just novelty, right, but it's real supply shortage and the price shock. And when it comes back to the AI front, Anthropic is surging in the AI race. Essentially, Anthropic is attracting investors that are offering that it could push its valuation above $800 billion. Yes, you heard it. Its valuation of Anthropic at $800 billion. The latest round of valuation was about $380 billion. That was just 2 months ago. But this potential IPO rumored as early as October can change the valuation of Anthropic from $380 billion in valuation to $800 billion. Essentially, where is this coming from? Anthropic projects revenues of $30 billion, up from $19 billion. And this is really giving a run for its money to OpenAI, because OpenAI is about $24 billion annualized revenue. And it just shows that when it comes to the strategic projected revenue of Anthropic and where it's actually increasing its revenue from to $30 billion, up from $19 billion. Well, here's the key thing. It comes down to enterprise business traction. So enterprise and dev tools driven momentum. This is the field that's been growing Anthropic's business, essentially through Claude Code, which is a developer adoption for enterprise business, is shifting towards enterprise AI clients. It is a higher margin game than the end consumer. That would just be you and I. And there's buzz around advanced agent systems as Mythos. So not only has it decided to become a service provider for enterprise and enterprise developers, but also its recent, news on what it's going to be pushing out in its latest technology under Mythos is also creating that buzz around its valuation. So valuation gap has narrowed fast. OpenAI still leads at $852 billion in valuation. Anthropic is shortly catching up to $800 billion in valuation. So that is to be seen how this plays out. But of course, there has been some complaints about the performance of Claude models, and there's speculations on compute constraints. But the company is denying any of this as degradation. They're saying that they're going to go for it and really, really break through when it comes to the enterprise space. Now, this AI race is shifting because you're seeing all of this play out at a very fast rate. But, what's interesting is, you would expect this from AI companies, this from a shoe company. If you recall, Allbirds is a shoe company, right? They just announced a $50 million financing deal to reinvent itself as Newbird AI. They're converting the footwear company that's been not doing so well. Essentially, Allbird is a company now going from footwear to GPU rental business, sending shock, if you can imagine, its stock up to 600% on the pivot. So imagine going from the footwear company to reinventing yourself as Newbird AI, going into the AI business completely, and your stock has now gone up 600%. Now, what is this all about? Well, Allbirds initially sold its brand assets to American Exchange Group in March for $39 million. It's a massive fall from the company's $4 billion IPO peak at 2021. So it saw it's not doing so well. So it did its brand assets, sold it off. But now the AI compute has now moved into sending shares to Bird, which is the IPO, from $3 to over $20, lifting a market cap that closed just recently at $22 million just 2 days ago. So why is this happening? The company has said now the $50 million deal will fund the GPU purchase to launch a GPU as a service business, renting out AI compute under long-term contracts, essentially being able to show shareholders that, hey, we have the subscriptions and we have this generating revenue model coming in. Essentially, shareholders are also going to vote next month to strip Allbirds' public benefit status and essentially formally ending the company's sustainable footwear mission. So if you have an Allbirds footwear shoes, then that's going to be a legacy item of sorts. Now, the CEO said that they love to say that every company will eventually become an AI company, but little do they think that a business would go from becoming footwear to essentially GPU rental. So that is very interesting. So the pivot is happening, and that's the latest thing. The stock surge was 582% on announcement of this pivot. And this comes at a time where we're seeing that AI companies are valuated at a very high amount. And there's that entire criticism of, is there going to be an AI bubble, and what does that mean for the industry and the amount of money that's being invested in AI overall? That's all the time we have today for Wine Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh. Until next time, take care and be well.